Welcome to Sarder TV, an idea-sharing platform started by Russell Sarder, investor, author, and CEO of Netcom Learning. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Alan Hassenfeld believes in giving away money. His family business is toy titan Hasbro, a company with a heart and a culture of giving. Alan, thank you so much for coming in and talking with us. Talk about what it's like growing up with the ability to play with any toy you want.
First of all, who said I ever grew up? I still think like a 7-year-old most of the time. But it's funny, growing up, we didn't have that much. Even though Hasbro was very small in those days, it was about, I think when I was born, it was only about a $10 million, $15 million company. Most of the toys, whether it was the Merry Milkmen and that, well, weren't my favorite. But then Potato Head came along. And Potato Head was great for me because I took all the vegetables I didn't like. And in those days, you put the pieces in the vegetable or whatever. So if it was asparagus or if it was cauliflower, anything I didn't like, I tried to ruin. But no, it was wonderful because I get to go to Toy Fair with my dad, you know, and when you're 6 or 7 years old, and even today for me, there's a wonder about going to Toy Fair and seeing all of the wonderful creations, whether it's your own companies or someone else's. But I used to play with toy soldiers, and I used to roll a ball and knock them over. But no, it just, anyone who touches the toy industry doesn't like to leave the toy industry, because if you're able to be young all the time, and that's what the toy industry is, it makes you think like a child many times.
Which is in fact the reason why you're in New York. Isn't this
it's Toy Fair time.
Toy Fair time. Yeah. Speaking of, what's on the horizon? What's new out there for kids?
Well, so many things. But you know, Hasbro basically has been very, very fortunate. And it really started with my brother and then myself, where when we were fortunate to be somewhat successful and we bought another company, we always looked to find things that would stand the test of time. So when you look at the Hasbro portfolio, whether it be Monopoly, whether it be Clue, whether it be G.I. Joe, whether it be Star Wars, whether it be My Little Pony, Battleship, whatever, those properties have stood the test of time. But every year, our toys are real. It's like Toy Story. They come to life, and they always want new clothes. I mean, as I look at my own wife, and she likes to have the new color fashions every year, toys demand to have an update of what children want. Because the most important thing about a toy is it stimulates imagination and creativity. Too often, I think we as adults forget that we were once kids. And how many of us really remember what it was like chasing the wind with a kite? And so I say to people, always remember, stop having your child do this and this and this. Give them freedom, because a child's work is a child's play, because they're learning to socialize with other children. They're learning shapes, they're learning sounds, they're learning colors, they're learning. But the most important thing is imagination.
So true. But how do you do that? How do you take iconic brands, iconic toys that we all grew up with, and make it fresh for this generation? We know with the electronic toys and video games, how do you make that fresh and keep the kids still interested in those toys that we all loved?
Well, a couple things, and I won't answer your question maybe directly, but I'll start by saying, what is the most important asset that Hasbro has? The most important asset are our people, because ideation, creativity come from your people. And if you don't have great people, their job today is to look under every stone, look in every country for what are the latest things that kids are looking at. Remember, kids are like fish. One minute they're here, the next minute they're there. And we have to be able, you know, years ago we weren't as flexible. but you have to be able to move and move very quickly. And be very honest, Vanessa, one of the things that is new to us is how many products we're seeing for the first time on YouTube, where someone has invented something and it's a laugh or a scream and there are a lot of followings. We'll talk to that person and maybe buy the item from that person and turn it into a mass-produced product, or sometimes we might license it. But today, you must be willing. There are no boundaries. When I say there are no boundaries, you must be able to give your people a free hand to look anywhere and everywhere for the next fad, the next thing that's happening. And one of the things that I think disappointed some people this Christmas was, as you know, we have the license for Star Wars. And we've had the relationship with George Lucas for a long time. But all of a sudden, now that it's owned by Disney, Bob Iger became fascinated as he was putting Disney Plus together with a show called Mandalorian. And within Mandalorian is what's become Baby Yoda, the child. So you'll see the child this year very definitely. But because we didn't, Bob and the Disney team kept it very tight under wraps for a long time. So we did not have the chance really to execute a quality toy, not a paste on or something like that for Christmas last year.
That is excellent point, because that was the most in-demand toy last year. And as a business, that must have hurt that toy wasn't available to all the parents and kids clamoring for it.
Yeah, I know, but they don't understand. In Santa's workshop, it's not a magic wand. We can't wave a magic wand and have the product, come alive immediately. But it was a disappointment. But years ago, and I don't know if your viewers know this story, but years ago when Star Wars first came out, and I think it was, 78 or 79, Bernie Loomis, who was the head of General Mills' toy group and Kenner Toys at the time, nobody had ever seen toys sell from a movie. But Kenner had taken the license, but didn't do much with it. All of a sudden, Star Wars comes out, and Bernie says, "Oh my God, this is incredible." What he ended up doing was he ended up creating a package with no product that sold for, I think, $4.99. They sold 10 million units with the promise that the product would come 4 or 5 months later. And we couldn't do something like that today, because can you imagine the screaming and the disappointment of a child, even though they had a picture that was of what was going to come? But it was a genius stroke at the time. And that was honestly, I think, the first time that toys really began to play off of movies.
You mentioned a couple of things in your answers. You talked about flexibility, and you talked about thinking outside of the box, finding ideas online. And I guess in the past you would have a formal pitch, you would have people you got your ideas from. Is there a lesson for any business in what you just said today?
I think there is. I think that, many of us, especially some of us that are a little bit older, we have to understand that it's very, very important. Again, the most important thing are your people, that we listen to our people. My wife constantly tells me, God gave you 2 ears to listen with, not to talk with. And she's right. And I think the more we listen to kids and watch where they're going. But years ago, many toy companies, including Hasbro, were companies that were NIH. That was not invented here. Today, that is completely gone. We must rely upon the wonderful inventing community. We have wonderful relationships with many people around the world that are creating ideas. We have wonderful people inside creating ideas, but you can't just do it inside. You must look everywhere, because the world is changing. It's changing quicker than I would like. And many people worry, oh, Alan, with all of the technology and everything, what's going to happen and this and that. And I said, if you position it properly, I look at board games today. We sell more monopolies today than ever before. But it must be something that really engages the child. And again, you have to constantly update, let's say the board, the monopoly board. Ask people what they want to be on the board. Never give up on the original number 9. But
well, it was interesting because it is the same concept, but I've seen so many different versions of Monopoly.
You're just taking advantage of, depending upon the country, depending upon the topic. Now, we don't manufacture all of those. We have a licensee for the shorter runs. If there's a TV show that maybe you're going to sell 10 or 15,000 pieces, but we're normally in a monopoly selling 500,000 or more. So we'll partner with other people because, again, another one, I always use my dad. Dad used to say, more people die of indigestion than starvation, which means if you're greedy and you don't share, you could be in trouble.
The beginning of the company, I don't know, how much is Hasbro worth? I have a number here, $5 billion, is that correct?
No, we do about $5 billion, 4.8 in sales. It's a worth on the stock market today about 13 billion. We are all over the world, and we have wonderful partners. I'm so proud of the way things have progressed because again, it was my grandfather who came over from Poland, and I think landed around in the early 1900s. He came with his brother. They landed at Ellis Island. They had nothing. When I say they didn't speak English, they had maybe 2 nickels, and there was some distant relative that took them in, and they literally sold rags on the street. And the way they moved to Rhode Island was Rhode Island in the early 1900s was a textile capital because of the rivers. And, our first toy, ended up being a doctor kit. We made hat liners, we made pencil boxes, and that led to a doctor kit. And the first major toy that really put us on the map was one little Mr. Potato Head. Now, Potato Head and I don't get along. Everybody knows that.
It's a rival between Mr. Potato Head.
No, Potato Head thought he should have been chairman and CEO, and that I was nobody. He's right. But anyway, then after my grandparents, my grandfather and his brothers, my father and his brother took over. One went to Tennessee with the pencil business. We stayed north with the toy business. And after Dad died in '79, my brother took over. Steve was a genius. He was really the architect of the modern toy industry, licensing, TV programs, and things like that. But we really believed in looking for evergreen properties that could stand the test of time. So it's one of those wonderful stories where my ancestors really came totally from nothing. And for me, the important thing, I took over from Stevie in '89 on his death. And then in 2003, I had a heart attack in '98. And I had decided I didn't want to stay forever. How do I make sure we perpetuate Hasbro? Because I'd seen so many other toy companies go by the wayside. And so when I sort of planned my own demise, didn't know what it was going to be like. And my most trusted lieutenant at the time was Al Verrecchia. Al, I passed the baton to Al in 2003. But at the same time, had hired Brian Goldner in 2000 with the hope. Brian was an incredible talent coming out of advertising world in Bandai, a Japanese toy company, and with the hope that after 5 years, Al wouldn't pass the baton to Brian. And so we are probably one of the most fortunate companies in the world in the sense we've passed the baton twice now outside of the family, and it's worked. And Brian has been spectacular as a CEO and chairman. My job right now in what I do at Hasbro, desperate to make sure the family culture and ethic and morality remains. Do we do things wrong? Yep. But I have a saying, problems are like ice cream cones. If you don't lick them quickly, they become very messy.
Yeah.
And so everyone follows that philosophy. If you got a problem, tell people what the problem is. How did it happen? What you're going to do to fix it, and then shut up. But too often people basically give out 10% of the problem, thinking that they can stick their head in the sand. Don't do that. Tell people what it is. They'll listen. You want to be out of the news. You don't want to be in the news every day with a little bit more and a little bit more that you have to say.
Those are culture and CEO leadership traits that a lot of businesses try to follow. Number one, it's very unique to have a family-owned business with family members there, passing it to someone outside of the family. They usually keep it there no matter how terrible the family may be at running the business, which is interesting, and always looking for the next leader. That's also important, and the culture of a company. Everyone talks about that today, and a lot of employees look for companies with great culture to work for regardless of the paycheck.
One of the most important things that we do, and this goes a little bit to philanthropy, I have always had a passion that you have to give back. If you're fortunate enough to be successful, how much is enough? But in giving back, you must be strategic in how you give back. And we created, I don't know if we were the first or one of the first, but we created something called what I call the triple threat. And the triple threat was, yes, companies give philanthropy. A lot of times in the old days, it used to be the CEO's wife wanted to be on the board of the army, forgetting that. But you can give philanthropy, but giving in kind. And in our case, it's much easier because whether it's orphanages, foster care, conflict zones, we're able to send toys anywhere in the world to children in dire need. But they have to be in need. But the third thing, which I think we were one of the first, was we give our people paid 4 hours a month to do volunteerism in the community. And I have, as you know, been a part of Salesforce.com since the beginning. And when Mark Benioff, who's the incredible creative genius of Salesforce, when Mark heard me speak at Aspen, we became close friends, and I explained this whole concept. And he now has what's called the 111, which is the same thing, but all of his employees are giving back time into the community. And the reason that's so important is when people see that a company really has heart. It's easy to mouth words, but people see through mouthing words today. But if they see that the company really has heart, that has people staying at a company. In other words, it's a bond. I can remember every year we used to bring our people together near the Christmas time, and we'd bring some of the people we were funding, whether it was a nun from Appalachia, whether it was Operation Smile, and we would video their presentation. It wouldn't be long, explaining what they did and how we were involved. Because we wanted, it's not only important that your people love the company or believe in what the company is doing, but we also wanted the families. So everyone got a disc to take home if they wanted to show it, so they would be proud of where their husband or where their wife worked.
It's something you called Tikkun Olam?
Tikkun Olam, it's giving, it really for me, it's just, my job has always been where can I put a smile on a face where there's been a frown or a tear? How do you try and make things better? You can't do it for everybody. You can just make a little bit of difference and hope that other people might be a little bit moved by what you're doing and maybe volunteer 1 hour at something. Because the most wonderful thing for me is many of the things that we're doing, but whether it be Hasbro or the family, it makes you feel good. how many boats can you have? How many airplanes can you I look at people and I say, I wish I knew how they found the secret of how they can take it with them. And,
You can't.
And I'm also not a great person, and I don't mean to go on this way. I'm not a great person in an endowment. I believe that every organization should have an endowment if there was 7 years of famine. In other words, they took in no money to cover all their costs. Because the first day of the future for everybody is today. And we create the future. We don't walk into the future. We create the future. And therefore, I want to spend my own family dollars on making things happen now versus in 10 or 15 years.
You mentioned Salesforce. What is it?
Let's just say, let me use the word CRM. And as I say, I have to be very careful today because we're releasing earnings in a week, and I'm in what's called a blackout period. And everyone knows I'm a black sheep. I have a tendency to say things I'm not supposed to say. But Salesforce really is in the cloud. And probably in connectivity, I've never watched a company. I joined the company on the board when there were 200 or 300 people, and now there are over 30,000. And it's one of the things that Mark and I are constantly talking about is how do you try, as you're growing so rapidly, onboarding 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people a year, how do you try and instill in them the culture? Mark thinks a little bit Hawaiian, and we have this what we call ohana, which in Hawaiian is family culture. But as you grow that quickly, it's not easy. Now, where Hasbro's concerned, I go back a couple times a year to talk to some of our wonderful new talents. And I try and, through stories, and I love telling stories because nobody has stepped on more landmines than I have and somehow survived. But it's wonderful to be able to tell them. And the reason for the book, that wasn't, Wayne and I have known each other. He did Toy Wars first, which was the Hasbro Mattel Wars and all of that. But the most important thing I realized was all of a sudden, many of the people I'm talking to have come to a company which is $5 billion. I came to the company when it was $30 million. I wanted people to understand our history because even in America today, we don't teach history as much as we should. And I wanted people to begin to understand who came before them to set the table. And when I say that, when I came into the business in the late 60s, we weren't a big company. And when my dad died, regrettably, we were about a $50, $60 million company and losing money. But no father ever set a better table for two sons to sit down to, in the sense that even though we weren't that successful, my dad was beloved. Whether he was giving away money that he didn't have, and when Dad died, he didn't have that much to give away. He left a letter for us. And he basically said, look, I've left nothing to charity. I leave it to you because all my life I have believed in living charity. Now it is up to you to take up the gauntlet and basically give while you're alive to make a difference in this world.
And that's exactly what you've done. I mean, your philanthropy is impressive. Talk about that just a little more, about all the hospitals here in New York, schools around the world, and such.
Well, the most important part of, I watch people sign contracts and put names on buildings and this and that. The most important thing is finding things that really are meaningful to you. Now, metrics are important, what you're doing, but that's not the only thing. You have to believe in the passion of people that you're dealing with. I'll give you an idea. In Rhode Island last year, people came to me from something called the Noel Academy. I didn't really know it that well. And what Noel does is when they came to me, they said, Alan, look, we're looking to move to a new building to expand. Can you help us? Can you give something? a lot of our funding does come from the government. I said, great. Tell me about it. Well, it turns out that when they had come to me, they had already graduated 572 women. They basically are able to handle 160, and they were trying to expand, each year. But what does Noel do? They take young ladies that have become pregnant in high school, that in most cases drop out of high school to have the baby, and if there wasn't a home for them or a place for them to continue their education, they'd probably go on welfare. And so Noel basically takes the young ladies and helps them get their high school diploma, and some of them going on to higher education. And for me, that meant whatever we do there, we're not saving a life, but giving a life a purpose. So I love things like that. There are so many stories. I mean, I love obviously doing things for children because that's where our success has been. So whether it's Hasbro Children's Hospital, whether it's the Hassenfeld Family Hospital here at NYU in New York, whether it's the Institute of Pediatric Innovation at Brown studying autism, obesity, and asthma. Philanthropy must be focused. Corporate philanthropy, and I know what Milton Friedman said. Milton Friedman said the business of business is business. Business of business is business, but the business of business is also thinking about the business in the future. And if you basically do the right thing within your community and doing the right thing about corporate social responsibility, not talk, but do. I just find that corporations should give tangentially. That is, they should give within their own communities to make their communities better. Because if we weren't helping the healthcare system in Rhode Island or the education system in Rhode Island, our employees would leave. So there's method, to that madness.
Exactly.
So give back to your communities wherever they might be, and give back to your major constituent. In our case, it's easier than most because it's children, and families. But now let me turn the table on something called, and Brian's been such a great proponent of this. It used to be CSR, corporate social responsibility. Then it was corporate sustainability, and now it's ESG, environment. I call it sustainability and governance. Those are all words. But when we talk about the environment, not everyone believes that. I happen to live in Rhode Island. I know the water's rising, but forget that. I know the weather's changing. But when we talk about the environment, and whether it's be the amount of board we use, or the trees that are cut down to make the board, or the frustration of parents on Christmas Day when they can't untie the product that's in the package, because we've learned that, I can give you an idea, even with someone like Amazon. A toy might be this high or this wide in the store with this beautiful packaging. Amazon said, no, we don't need that. People already know what they want. Put it in a smaller box, in a mailer, with none of those ties. We're happy. Number one, we're saving on cost, on freight, on everything. So many people are afraid that when you talk environment, it's going to cost you. If you attack it properly, it's actually going, in some cases, to lower your costs and make you more friendly.
What's next for the foundation? What's next for you?
For me, my wife would like me to edit my life a little bit and slow down. I think, look, it really depends. Social justice is very important for me. We all use the word diversity. Everybody, either by the luck of the draw, you're either yellow, red, green, blue, black, white. I don't care. It's just, what can you bring to the table? Let's stop talking. I hate seeing people on the street. I hate seeing the cost of medical care. How do we give everybody a chance to smile rather than to have to fight so hard to survive? And I'm approached a lot to do things overseas. And yes, I've got a wonderful project in Thailand called the Bamboo School. But I basically am pulling back from doing things overseas. And people are saying, well, Alan, you've done it, you've been very successful. Why are you doing that? I said, look, if I really look at America today, we have more severe problems in America than many other countries. I mean, I think our our infant mortality rate, I think we're 18th or 19th on the list today. I mean, what do we do, first of all, before I tell other people what to do? Why don't we take care of what we do here so we can be proud? Yes, I run a human rights program in China for the factory workers in our sector, because when I started the whole thing 15 years ago, and now I'm chairman emeritus and I'm stepping back, but nobody wants a toy that's made with sweat, blood, and tears. And there were many horrific stories. I'm happy to say today we've risen the bar incredibly, and believe it or not, the Chinese government actually has been a good partner in helping to clean up some of the bad situations in some of the factories there. But I like to say to people, look, no country makes toys, companies make toys, okay? And if we who are leaders in the industry only are buying on price and not worried about how they're made, we got a problem.
Awesome. Before I let you go, you started talking about the Bamboo School. I just want to make sure I'm clear about what is the Bamboo School?
The Bamboo School is what Michai, Kun Michai, got me involved a number of years ago. The Bamboo School is in an area of Thailand that's fairly poor, and kids come into it, but we're teaching them what we call the barefoot entrepreneur. They make ethylene out of sugarcane. The skill sets of these kids and the kids run the school literally with great teachers. It's up in a place called Buriram on the way to Cambodia. And it's about 1,000 kids, and Michai is the most passionate human being you've ever seen about improving the lives of children and teaching them a skill early on. Many of our kids are fortunate enough because of the education system to go on to university. A couple of them have come back and are now part of the school and teaching. But when you see things like this, it honestly puts a smile, because look, when someone gives $1 away to whatever the charity is, they want to make sure that, if possible, 100 cents on the dollar is working. And for me, look, there are programs that I've been a part of that have not been good. I'll be the first one to say that. Everything doesn't work. But don't give up. No matter what, keep trying to make a difference.
Awesome. You're awesome. Kid Number One is your book, which you mentioned briefly, and I guess it talks about you and all that you do, which takes a book, quite frankly, to note it all.
Well, again, Kid Number One, first of all, I didn't write it. Wayne wrote it, because Wayne Miller, who I've known for years, and he wrote the first book on Hasbro. He'd come in to study the ups and downs of G.I. Joe, and then watched Hasbro go through an ideation where Mattel tried to take us over at one point. And as I say to people, one of the stories in that book is my mother calling me because Mattel made a fantastic offer financially. Mom said, "You're taking it, aren't you?" And I said, "Mom, it's up to the board," and yada, yada, yada. Mom said, "Well, don't be surprised if you hear about a woman calling the hospital in Rhode Island to see if she took the wrong baby out of the hospital." But most importantly for me is I wanted the history of Hasbro to be told, because how many companies can say they've survived? Remember, there is a saying, Vanessa, the first generation of the pioneers, the second generation keep it going and growing it, and the third generation throws it all away.
Blows it.
Hey, I got out before the curse of the third generation. I leave it to Brian, to take it to the next, because, he's just done the largest acquisition we've ever done, buying Entertainment One for about $4 billion.
And what is Entertainment One?
Well, we have a huge amount of intellectual property at Hasbro, probably 6,000, 7,000 years of intellectual property if you take the birthdays of everything. But two of them, one Dungeons and Dragons, one Magic the Gathering, we have to begin, we want to begin to talk, storytell better and produce movies and produce TV. But I think people here might also know Entertainment One for something called Peppa the Pig.
Oh, okay.
Peppa's Hours.
Is that on Nickelodeon?
It's on all over the world,
Oh,
Peppa.
okay.
And I can't, it's not something I watch every day,
Yeah.
but PJ, and they have a wonderful staple of wonderful products, but they have a talent that supersedes our talent in the sense of production and in storytelling.
And where's Entertainment One based? Is it here in New York or?
No, Entertainment One actually was on the London Stock Exchange. They were really heavily in Canada and heavily on the West Coast. Okay, and so we're right in the heart of Hollywood.
You were terrific. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Join us next time on Sarder TV, where thought leaders come to share their ideas.